Hello and welcome to Truth Be Known, stories about how modern data leaders seek truth in an uncertain world. Today's episode features an interview with KJ Gupte, data science lead at Tradeshift, a cloud-based platform for supply chain payments. KJ has had nearly 15 years of experience in the industry. Before Tradeshift, KJ served as data analytics manager at PwC, where she led a team of engineers and developers in making data-centric products for customers like Apple, Google, and HP. She's also a graduate of the Harvard Business Analytics program and says her experience in the data science pipeline and critical thinking course felt like rewiring her brain to think about data in new ways. In this episode, KJ discusses translating very technical data to her stakeholders, building credibility in data among the C-suite, and being a trailblazer in the whole supply chain economy. But before we get into it, here's a brief word from our sponsor.
Truth Be Known is brought to you by Talend. A leader in data integration and data integrity, Talend enables every company to find clarity amidst the chaos. Talend Data Fabric brings together in a single platform all the necessary capabilities that ensure enterprise data is complete, clean, compliant, and readily available to everyone who needs it throughout the organization. Learn more at talend.com. That's TALEND.com.
And now please enjoy this conversation between KJ Gupte, data science lead at Tradeshift, and your host, Rob Norman.
Welcome to Truth Be Known. I'm Rob, and today I'm joined by KJ Gupte. KJ, it is great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Rob. It was really an honor to be invited on the show and talk about my favorite subject. So yeah, very excited.
Excellent. Okay, just for those who may not be familiar with you and your work, can you just give us a little bit of background?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a senior data scientist at Tradeshift. We are a late-stage startup. In fact, we just closed our funding round for 200 million. So very excited about it. We are a SaaS company.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. We are a SaaS company. So been here for last 5 years in the role of the senior data scientist. Now I'm the data science lead. And I've been a manager in the data analytics and forensics practice at PwC before I joined Tradeshift. And before that, I was a software engineer for Infosys. So it's been a while I've been in this field, like almost 15 years now.
Can you tell us just a bit more about your role? What's your role as a data scientist? Where do you spend most of your time? Could you give us just a little bit of insight into your role, what it entails, whether you have a team? Just give us a bit of background to that.
Yeah, so as a data scientist, my role has evolved a lot. So initially, probably what I'm doing right now is very different from what I used to do when I started off. But as a data scientist, that's what you do, right? Like you understand data. Mostly you have the kind of skill set to understand data that most of your users and your stakeholders don't. So your primary focus is to actually drive that understanding to your audiences in a way that they understand. So I get technical when I'm understanding data, but then I have to define the data elements in a non-technical story kind of a way to my audiences so that it makes sense to them. The data has to tell a story. That's really the nutshell of my role, right? But initially, I started off with understanding the data landscape of the platform, understanding where the data is coming from, understanding the anomalies, and what the issues could be in the data, understanding the infrastructure. And then coming up with key performance indicators that could be used for, highlighting specific aspects of the performance of the platform. So define it with the user. So KPI that works for one team might not necessarily work for another team. So you have to be in that focus. Like you have to collaborate with your users and see what they're looking for and define that and then model that in the data that you have. So I spent a lot of my initial time in understanding the data. Then I spent a lot of time collaborating with my teams to define the right kind of metrics. Then I spent a lot of time with data engineers to come up with the right data to put in the pipeline before I start modeling it. And then my core job was to write code on that data to make that data kind of tell a story and then deploy it to my users.
Super interesting. And are you doing this with a team underneath you, or are you solely responsible for the data science at Tradeshift?
So I am an individual contributor in many ways, but that said, I also have to kind of lead the project many times, because when you collaborate with people, you kind of also ask for help from them. Right now, I'm sitting with finance and leading a lot of operating metrics, right? So for that, I have to constantly work with finance to see what they're looking for, if they have any issues that they are seeing, if they're even understanding the story that we are trying to tell, right? So it's kind of like both ways. It's like it has to be a two-way street, if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that's great context, and I think just segueing into the end users, because you mentioned finance there, so you have your business stakeholders that you're engaging with and helping them to understand the data, but also helping you working with them so that you understand what they need, right? So your business units are principally finance. Is that the function you primarily support, or is it broader than that?
No, it is way broader than that. So right now it is like it is finance on paper, but like it's kind of like a dotted line between product and finance, right? And it's always that way. So initially when I joined Tradeshift, I was part of engineering, because a lot of work needed to happen within engineering to make the data available. So my primary focus was to interact with most of the engineering and product manager teams there. Then I moved into strategy, because then we had data that we had to play strategically to drive decisions. So I did a lot of work within strategy for projects that were driven by strategy. And then now I'm being put in finance. Again, my role still is cross functional. I'm still working with all the teams, including customer success. But because right now we are in a place where finance is driving a lot of metrics, we are sourcing these metrics for business use as well. And also, these are the metrics that we are presenting to the board. It made most sense for me to like sit under the CFO and like work with these numbers. But that actually always evolves and changes. So it's not like a fixed role. As I said, data scientist is a very broad role.
It's a broad role. Yeah, absolutely. And when you're working with finance, and you've already mentioned a few of these, in order for a data scientist to work effectively with their end users, their stakeholders, what would you say are the key things that will drive success in that relationship?
The biggest thing is to be extremely open and collaborative. So that is something that it's has been challenging in most of the software companies, where engineering is siloed, individual contributors are siloed, and then one does not know the other. I think what has helped me drive success is being extremely collaborative with the team and extremely transparent, because many times when you are transparent and and you exchange your thoughts, that's where you get the most gains. So I might be thinking about data from an angle, and the users might be thinking about it from a very different angle, right? And a lot of exchange needs to happen, because not everybody looks at the data in the same way. So when there is exchange of information, when there is exchange of perspectives, that is where you actually drive the actual matter, the actual subject. So that has helped me in my projects a lot, because everybody comes with a very different skill set, whether you are an engineer, whether you are a data scientist, whether you are a CEO, CFO. Everybody has a core skill set that they bring to the table. It's not always the same or uniform. So a collaboration and transparency is always the key.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that you're mentioning how business users come at this sometimes from a different place when they're looking at data than yourself, or than data scientists will look at it. So getting everyone on the same page, I think, is what you're saying, right? So you're all speaking the same language, you're all looking at the problems in the same way.
Yeah, like to start with, we are speaking in different languages. Then when we start exchanging ideas, that's where we come up with like a common language. And then we are like, okay, now we get it. Now we are, pursuing the common goal.
Yeah. And how do you then translate that back into the engineers? Okay, now the requirements and business need is understood. Now got to turn in towards the actual data itself, work with the data engineers, make that data available, visualize it in a way that our stakeholders can understand. How do you drive success so that ultimately you can deliver on what you've agreed with your business stakeholders?
So one thing that has helped me in the past is I was one of them. So I started off as an engineer. I started off writing chunks of code for COBOL back then. I don't even know if people write in that language. But the one thing that helped me is experience. Wearing their hat, so experience from where they were coming from. So it made a lot of sense to completely get away from the non-technical aspect after I had the problem statement, and then go into a mindset where everything was going to be technical, everything needed to be translated into technology, whether it was code, whether it was infrastructure, or whether it was just the problem statement. So experience is what helped. Having technical knowledge definitely goes a long way.
And if for the audience that's listening, if there were some sort of practical tips in terms of how you might recommend ensuring success. So for you, success has come from experience, makes a ton of sense. And it's a real advantage that you have in being able to work from experience, in the sense that you were a data engineer, so you understand what they need. But if you are wanting to give recommendations for those that are data scientists that are turning back towards their data engineers to translate that business requirement, are there any additional things that you would say, yeah, these are key success points that they'd need to, that you'd recommend them following?
Yeah, for sure. Because, data and like the entire data industry has evolved so much that a lot is being made available or being made easy for users. So even if you don't have a technical background, even if you just go into the weeds of data to understand how data is like saved, how data structures are created, and how data is housed within a platform, and then just like use data sets in your day to day, have an analytical mindset, and think about it in terms of, okay, so probably this is, if I had data for this problem, how would I solve it? If you just bring it into your mindset, all you need is an analytical mindset, because that's an engineer's mindset, right? If you go into that, like in that direction, it makes it very easy for you to approach an engineer and talk with them, because they are in their box thinking about things in very analytical and engineering terms. So many times when they're interacting with business comes from a totally different place. So it helps. And again, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but just to give you an example, SQL is the most used language right now, and it is really not as hard as it used to be. Like, all there are web-based tools where you can understand core SQL foundations, and even if you understand core foundations of the lay of the land of data, it's easy for you to approach data with engineers. You know what I mean? So it's kind of very easy. Like, there are SaaS based tools. There is Tableau, which is kind of a great version of Excel, where you can kind of literally do small things in a big way. So it's a matter of understanding these tools. These tools paint a great picture about data that was not available in the past. There are many SaaS based tools these days. So if you bring these tools into your day to day, if you just use them to solve like small simple problems, it will make you very data savvy, which will help you to understand or talk in that language.
Makes a ton of sense. Makes a ton of sense. How far along the path to being data driven is your company? It's because everyone's on that journey. So I'd love to hear from you. Would you say your organization is data driven now? And if so, how did you crack the code? And if not, what would you say is missing?
So we are absolutely data driven right now, like as we speak. I'm very glad I was hired at the point that I was, because that's where we were scaling up, and that's where we were sitting on like chunks of data that was like so potent that it was just a matter of using it. So we are absolutely data savvy right now, and in fact we are sitting on buyer and seller supply chain data, right, which is like the core of the supply chain disruptions that are going on. So we are in so many ways trailblazers to the whole supply chain economy, and we kind of, I'm glad that we are making use of the data, and we have identified that our data is like meaningful and of value. But it was a journey to get there, because I think right now everybody wants to be data driven, but by the time startups get to a place where they want to be data driven, they are already at a place where they are scaling up. The product has evolved, they have users. Now it's just a matter of scaling up. If at that point, if you start becoming data driven, it is a little too late, because most of the data that you want comes from your foundation, from your core infrastructure. So if you are kind of trying to make decisions out of data or gather data at a scaling up stage, it's kind of hard to make foundational changes for your reporting. So I always recommend that anytime you think of a new product, think in terms of data. Think about, what is it, how much of it, of data you can gather from your product, because that is what is going to take you a long way. Again, but going back to your question, are we data driven? Absolutely. Like, I think that's the core of our organization. Our leadership is very data heavy, so they focus on the teams to have data skills, at least basic data skills for the teams to make sense out of data. And now we are also kind of being asked data questions by, like, the World Economic Forum. We have our World Trade Index going on, so we are at a good place when it comes to data.
That's amazing. And yeah, and to a degree, it sounds like the company knew it needed and wanted to be data driven, and it's sort of part of its DNA, but you had to be there to drive that journey towards where you are now, which is data driven.
Absolutely. So I was like, I would say the first or the second data hire, so there weren't any data engineers or data scientists, but like the leadership knew that there was a lot of work that needed to be done in data. My core job was to actually convey that message. Initially, I spent a lot of time giving presentations on, just what we had, like not going into complexities, but presentations around, okay, this is what we have, this is the story that data is telling, and just making people curious, making people interested about data. Because if your data is not telling a story, it is just numbers. And many people who are non-technical are really thrown by numbers. So I had to spend considerable amount of chunk of my time in building stories using Tableau, kind of driving insights from data, asking questions, making people ask questions. Many times I used to always be referred as the professor, the data professor, because that's one hat that you really have to wear when you are kind of the torchbearer of data, and you want people to understand what you're saying. So I think that is part and parcel of every data person's job, whether the person is a data engineer or a data scientist, or even director of data. They all have to have the professor's hat at some point to drive the data message.
Yes, yeah, 100%. And it sounds like your leadership knew they wanted to be data driven, but they didn't know exactly how to be data driven. And it was up to you to help them to understand how to be data driven, the art of the possible. And then also establishing what are the priorities. If they know what the art of the possible is, you've conquered that barrier, which I think in some organizations can even be that. It's like, really pursuing the desire to be data driven. I think that's probably less and less these days. But when you've got that situation where you are acting as the professor, how did you align around some key initiatives and prioritize certain things over others?
So that is a biggest challenge, right? Because when it comes to data, things are needed as of yesterday. The moment you get data, it is stale. You already have data right now, but it has gone light years ahead. So you have to like be extremely fast, and you have to evolve with the data. So that was definitely a challenge. But what helped me is, one, I had a lot of visibility, which was great. So right from the time I was hired, I was directly working with leadership. On the one hand, I was also working with engineering to see the lay of the land, but I was working with my CEO, my CFO. I was working with the head of engineering to see what they were talking about, to understand their language. And once you have that kind of visibility, you very immediately start to see what your audience is looking for. These were the leaders that were driving the company, right? So that helped me to look at the picture from their perspective. Every time I came out of a meeting with the leadership, I was not just a data scientist with two eyes. I was actually a scientist with like six sets of eyes, right? So that definitely helped me. So one of the challenges is to prioritize. Once you have like a chunk of projects that a lot of work needs to be done, the first thing you look for is impact. impact goes a long way. So sometimes there's low hanging fruit, you can make, like, you can make nice reports out of it, but they are really not impactful. Like, the KPIs are good, but you don't really know how to drive them. So it's like the leadership tells you, if the leadership is telling you that, okay, this is the metric that everybody is looking for, that is the metric to go for. And many times it takes a while to come to that place. So you have a lot of other metrics going on, but then there is this key metric, which is your North Star goal. So in the past, there has been one project where, it was great. We had a metric, we had a reporting model for it, but it was not very flexible. It was not answering all our questions. And what we realized is, if we build a new model, and if we kind of make it flexible, that is going to go a long way, which was not a low hanging fruit. We had to keep a chunk of work at the back burner just to give traction to that project.
Are you able to share what that is, like just to bring it to life?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, like, our right now, our key performance indicator, and just one of them, is the gross merchandise value, which is like the total dollar spend between the buyers and sellers. So that always gives us a story of where we are heading. Like, what kind of transactions, and who are the buyers, and what are the markets, and stuff like that. So we always use that as like one of our metrics that leads the direction in which the platform is heading. We had a great model for it, but that model was only answering basic questions. We were not able to get into the root of, whatever issues. We were not able to get into the root of why there were anomalies, or what were the outliers doing differently. So it only made sense to recreate the model, which was like starting from scratch. I knew that once we do that, the impact will be even greater, because probably the GMV was answering, catering to 5 people, but if we changed the model, it would have catered to 100 people. So the impact of the new model was way higher, but it helped. So what we did was, we just kind of put everything else on a standstill. Then we just decided to recreate the whole model. We put all our heads down, all hands on deck. We took some time, we tested the model, but once we were able to get there, it helped to solve so many problems. It made things flexible. It solved a lot of problems that we were just, pushing for some other time. So those are the projects, and for that, prioritization is focused, because say if we would have not prioritized that, probably even today we would have stuck with a clunky model, and we would still have been, we would still answer the same way that we were. So I think those things, like I said, impact is the number one key to prioritization. Second is like transparency. So my leadership was very transparent with me about their goals. The leadership was transparent with the company about, what they want to do, and that way they got help from all the teams. So it's always, like I said, it's a two-way street. Collaboration is like, goes a long way.
Totally. Super insightful. Sometimes when you put fresh data in front of execs, they'll say, where does this come from? Can I trust the data? How do you address that? How do you make sure that what's in front of them is like, yeah, you're good, you can trust it?
Oh my God, Rob. Like, I think that is like, that was the only thing that was said to me the initial, my initial time in the company, right? Like, because initially there was nobody to put the data in front of the execs, and then there was me. And then every time I did that, they were like, okay, I mean, how can you be so sure? Are we really, like, is it really that clean? And so it's not like a silver bullet where I say and then they believe, right? It's not like that. So even like the way I mentioned my earlier project, it took a while to test the model, to see the trends in the model. What really builds credibility and trust is the trends. If you see that, okay, the trends are kind of stable, there are fluctuations, but most of the times the trend is stable. If you take a subset of the data, and if that data is also telling a similar story and then also highlighting anomalies, that also is credible. So it's not always one chart that makes the data credible. It's always kind of supplemental information alongside it, right? So this is the chart, but to make sense out of this chart, this is what you have to see, a subset of these are the anomalies, this is what they did, and this is what, this was the market, this was the market condition around it. So a storytelling approach is what worked for me. Initially there were a lot of failures, so my initial meetings failed because I was very confident about my data, but the audiences were not. So I used to always be sent back to do, okay, yeah, let's try again. So there were failures in my projects as well, but the storytelling approach helped, and while I was building the story, I was also getting a little gaining trust in my own data. So for me it was like it helped both ways, because I was, the more confident I felt, the more confident my audiences felt.
That underlying confidence in your data, was that principally due to the test and learn approach you took on the model, or were there underlying data governance foundations that you put in place to say, yes, I can definitely trust the data in my model?
Yeah, absolutely. So initially, I was working on a model that was created by a tool. So there was a tool and there was like a low code for the tool, which kind of did not help me with building my own, gaining my own trust, because every time I did a deep dive, I found something. I went down a rabbit hole. I found something and I was like, this does not look good. But once I started, we recreated the model from scratch, I knew that I had written my source code that was actually doing the legwork for the data. That source code was then we had built it together, right? So the engineering team was also part of it. They had given me a lot of direction and where the data was going, what were the issues while gathering data and stuff like that. So once we together built a source code that we tried and we tested and we PR reviewed like bunch of times, and then we put it in test for like almost 6 months to see whether our trends were kind of similar, and whether our correlation analysis was similar to the past data and stuff like that. So a lot of work went to build that foundation. So like you said, yes, governance, more than governance, it was due diligence. It was a lot of analysis, a lot of like going down rabbit holes, finding things, writing them down. And then at the end of the day, we came up with a white paper to write all the stuff that we had found. So now we have like found solid foundation in documentation, in our source code, and in the testing that we did, which was all together that helped us build our trust. And now that we have all that in place, it is very easy to convey that credibility to our leadership.
That's great. So now you're in a situation of the company being data driven. It sounds like it's data driven across finance. What are the big buckets of where data is really playing a key role driving the business forward? You mentioned finance, you mentioned gross margin, you mentioned even building data as an asset for external use and demonstrating the underlying data that the platform has that can be made available outside of the company. Those are two. Are there other big buckets where now the company's moved to that data-driven place and is leveraging?
Yeah, so like now initially we started off with seeing how customers are engaging on the platform, right? So most of the data that we started building was based on their engagement on the platform. Now we are actually leveraging that data and actually also making it available for our customers to see how they did. So we are actually using a lot of our data to provide to our customers and helping them with their analytics as well. So that is the key. Now we are kind of focusing on data to make the journey easier for our customers, to make it easier for our customers to be proud that they are on Tradeshift. Of course they are, but right now, like, the customers don't have the level of visibility to their data as much as we would want them to. So of course we are trying to make that one of our biggest projects.
So let's shift gears just slightly. I think we've covered a ton of ground, and that was super interesting. You're a data science leader at Tradeshift. What in your mind makes a good leader?
One is being extremely transparent about your goals and having like a collaborative mindset is what helps. The other thing is, I would like to use the word empathy, but empathy is not the way it is defined. Empathy is basically in a way that you can think outside your own head. Like many times as individual contributors, data people are very much in their own heads doing their own analytics. But to really drive success, you have to look at your work from the audience's point of view, right? So the way I said, every time I came out of a leadership meeting, I had 6 set of eyes, not just one. So I think a good leader is one who has the ability to ask for their audience's eyes, not really eyeballs, but you know what I mean, eyes, and gain their perspective and really not be afraid of asking questions like, what are you looking for? I'm thinking of this differently. What is your direction? How can you help me? And really being in that place of asking for help instead of telling people what to do.
Yeah, and certainly when, I've worked with data science teams in the past, and I remember in the beginning when we were starting to they were starting to produce a lot of data around performance marketing and delivering us insights, and we were starting to ask questions about could we see this and could we see that, and it was a real collaborative partnership. But I also remember at some stage there was kind of like this shift from that position to actually the data scientist saying, what I'm seeing in your data is this, and these are the trends that I'm looking at. And have you considered, it was almost as if the shift got to the point where the data scientist understood the marketing, the business, their stakeholder, almost as much as the stakeholder themselves when it came to the analytics side of it, right? So that was an amazing shift that I saw, and it's almost like a level of literacy and understanding of the business side that was really mature, and that happened over time.
Yeah, and that almost always happens because you are so much into like problem solving there that you just happen to look at the data from their standpoint, right? So I'm sure what might have happened with the data scientists is initially they might have started off with the data, and then after they started seeing trends in specific areas, they got interested in that. When they got interested in that, they started having an analytical mindset around that, and that's how they started viewing the audiences or the markets, right? So it's kind of the way you said, it's collaborative, and what helps is sometimes as a data scientist you catch things differently than your users, and you need to tell them this is what you need to see, because you are looking at a report for the first time on on your Monday morning. You are seeing a ton of numbers, but the data scientist has worked on it for like past 2-3 weeks, and they have looked at the trends in a different way. So it's always like, okay, they probably at this point know what you need to look for.
Yeah, so that empathy that you talk about is critical to move to a point of, yes, collaboration in the beginning, but actually later on partnership.
Yeah,
like true partnership in the sense of
a true
providing insights that the business stakeholder would perhaps get to over time, but like you can show it immediately because, as you said, you've been working on the data for 3 weeks and you now understand it, I would say, a greater degree than the actual business stakeholder, so you can point them out and add value instantly.
Yeah, and the confidence that comes from it is like very contagious, So it's kind of like if the data scientist is telling you something, you ought to just know that it's probably what it is.
Yeah. We're going to shift again because there's a nice little segment that we have in this podcast called Under Pressure. So your role has constantly evolved. You mentioned that since joining Tradeshift, but obviously over your career at PwC. Can you tell me what's the most difficult decision you've had to make in your career, and did data shape that decision in any way?
Yeah, like I think when I was approached by Tradeshift, I was a manager at PwC in their data analytics practice, right? And data was like has always been my passion. So when they approached me, it was a startup. I was not really thinking about startups as much, but when I looked at the product and the role, especially like when they hashed out that this is the role and this is what you will have to do in that role, I had done some of it in PwC, which was interesting, but working on a SaaS product and a SaaS product that sits on a ton of data that is so not leveraged as much, and you would be the one to do it. It was a hard decision, but I think data was a very big part of that decision. Like I looked up, and then I saw the KPIs that could come out of data like this, and also the partnerships. I said, like, the visibility was great. It was kind of a big risk, because as a data scientist, you are on your day one, you are supposed to face your audiences. Like I remember on my first day, first hour, I got an email, KJ, can you help us with these numbers? So I knew the risks with the job, but again, like I said, data was like the biggest thing. We had great infrastructure to start mining the data that we had created. I didn't know whether I was doing the right thing, but my career and my expertise in data kind of led me to take that decision.
Yeah, and it's always tough when you're effectively leaping into the unknown, but also in this case, you're effectively pioneering to a degree, right? Because you're moving to a space which is completely new, and yeah, you didn't really have a blueprint to follow to any degree.
Yeah, you said it, like, and many times that happens, because even now, if you look outside in the market, right, like, the job of a data scientist not really like set in paper.
Exactly.
Like, people know that they need a data scientist, but they don't really know what they need that data scientist to do. Most of it comes from the data scientist, like, they have to go in the data. So it was a very tough decision, but yeah, I'm very happy about it.
Yeah, and a tough decision, because at the same time you can see the opportunity.
Yeah.
Because how amazing is it to be able to shape it entirely?
Yeah.
But also that's like, wow, I have to get so comfortable with ambiguity and the risk associated to that. I was reading the Apple quote from the ads in the 70s, which is like, when they were launching, I think it was a brand ad, and it was like, here's to the misfits, here's to the ones that break the mold, etc. Right? So it's those are the ones that they're there to change, to make change in the world.
Yeah, and that's what the startup culture is about, right?
Exactly.
Like, take leap in the unknown, and hopefully you make a change. And I think as a data scientist, you have a lot of potential for impact and to make a change.
Totally. Closing out with a couple of quick fire questions. Best piece of a career advice you've ever gotten?
I think you nailed that one with the Apple quote, right? Like, for data scientists, I would say have an open mind, have be ready to fail, because we were told that the Harvard Business Analytics program that I took, that most of the data science projects fail. The ones that succeed are the only ones that you know about. There's so much learning at the end of it, that you always evolve in your role in the company data, and in all the problems that you're solving. So my advice to all the budding data scientists out there, and budding CDOs out there, is to be ready to fail and then learn from it.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And that is exactly how we learn the best. We don't really learn a great deal from our successes. We learn when things go wrong, and that's when there's a lot of introspection, and then and then we move forward from there. So that's awesome.
Yeah, and other people also start taking interest in you when you fail, right? Because they want to know, oh my God, what happened to you? Like, so yeah.
What happened to you? Yeah. Who do you look up to in the data space? Like, are there thought leaders, influencers that you keep tabs on social?
Oh my God, yeah. So the one person I look out for is Professor Datar, who is not on social media. I wish he was. Like, there are a lot of references to him, but he's not. But he was my favorite professor in the program, and just his
That was at Harvard, right?
Harvard.
That was when you did your Harvard program?
Yeah, that was at Harvard. And I think he's like the epitome of what a scientist should be, not just a data scientist, but a scientist, right? Like, he had that empathy or like out of the box thinking that he kind of brought out in us. And he actually made us answer our own questions, which is, I think the data scientist many times does that. Many times when you are like, in the dark and, the blind is leading the blind, you kind of help your audiences too. So he is something that I look up to in his critical thinking, in most of the articles that he's written, the way he guides businesses to approach data, to approach the people driving the data. He has a lot of emphasis on people. And then once you identify your people, identify what ticks them, identify what is their motivation, that's what is your answer to most of your challenges. So yeah.
Amazing. So to check him out, it's Dr. Data?
Professor Datar. Yeah, he's a dean at Harvard.
Professor Data, Datar, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Brilliant. And he's a professor at Harvard.
Yes. He taught our course on data analysis and critical thinking, which was the hardest course. It was extremely hard. And he cold called most of us. So yeah.
Amazing.
We'll never forget Professor Datar.
Amazing. And are there particular online sites you go to, resources, like places like online, I don't know, chats, communities, forums, particular websites that you go to stay on top of your game?
Lot of online data forums and discussions. The one that I go to very often is, or rather I'm part of, is the Harvard Business Review discussion forum. So that forum is like really good to understand where the businesses are heading, what are they looking for, and things that we don't really think about, or like anomalies, like we would have thought this, but oh my god, this happened. So discussions like those are always good in the Harvard Business Review discussion forum.
Nice. That's a great recommendation. We could chat for so much longer. It's been awesome having you on, KJ. It's been a real pleasure. If people want to get in touch, reach out, what's the best place to get in touch with you? Is it LinkedIn or Twitter or?
I'm very active on LinkedIn. Unfortunately, I'm not active as much on other social media as much as I am on LinkedIn. So yeah, find me on LinkedIn.
Amazing. KJ, thanks so much for joining today's episode. It's been great having you on. And for our listeners, really looking forward to the next episode. So see you all very soon.
Thank you so much, Robert. It was a pleasure.
Likewise. Cheers to KJ.
Truth Be Known is brought to you by Talend. A leader in data integration and data integrity, Talend enables every company to find clarity amidst the chaos. Talend Data Fabric brings together in a single platform all the necessary capabilities that ensure enterprise data is complete, clean, compliant, and readily available to everyone who needs it throughout the organization. Learn more at talend.com. That's TALEND.com.